So good morning and welcome to our EdTech Talks on remote and cloud filtering. My name is Luke Godfrey and I'm the UK Marketing Manager at Smoothwall. It's great to have so many people on today on this interactive session. So hopefully you've got lots of questions for Tom and Rob. So I'll now pass over to Rob, who'll run through the agenda and start the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke, and hi, everyone. So what we're going to cover today is some common challenges around remote and cloud filtering, going to what a hybrid filter is and how that might work. We'll go through some of the questions that we've had in advance and also any questions that you put through on the Q&A, and then just some wrap up at the end. So as Luke says, a very interactive session. We want to hear from you, want to hear about what issues and challenges you've got, any misconceptions or misunderstandings you've got about remote and cloud filtering. But yeah, it's very much your session. You know, we'll use the slides as talking points, but feel free to stick in those questions and discussion points. So just start off, what are the common challenges around remote and cloud filtering? So firstly, you know, some devices are not suitable to be used with cloud filtering. That's one of the common things, particularly older devices. A lot of people have got concerns around the filtering on the DFE devices, so the devices that were provided in the pandemic by the government, and that, you know, they've now got those devices, but they're perhaps not sure about the filtering on there, the quality of that and how that works. Inconsistent filtering in the cloud. So this is something we'll get onto, but, you know, if you've got both a product that you're using for the devices on your school network and then a different product or a different configuration when they're off-site, that inconsistency can lead to confusion and can impact teaching and learning. You know, if you've got students that are sometimes at school, sometimes at home, that inconsistency is not very helpful. So that's another kind of challenge that we see. Time and budget constraints are always going to be a challenge, regardless of what we're talking about in education. You know, we want to spend as little money as we possibly can, but we also want to make as much free time to be able to concentrate on you know, more productive things and dealing with technology. If you want full cloud, so to have no on-premise, you know, equipment on your school network, but also you want to kind of keep some of that behind, you know, there's kind of ways you might want to structure that can be difficult to achieve with some cloud filtering. We'll touch on that as well. And ultimately, you know, if you're juggling multiple products doing the same thing, that kind of cognitive load that you've got as an IT administrator is much higher, because you've got to think about, well, have we done it here and have we done it there? Are they consistent between the two things? And just even simple things like, you know, remembering 2 different logins for 2 different systems. You know, I think having separate products for both on-site and off-premise can be very confusing and you know, cause a lot of stress. So there's some of the things that we've seen over the last couple of years where remote off-site cloud filtering has really come into its own. But now, after the pandemic, where people were kind of reacting to the situation, kind of thinking on their feet and just implementing whatever they can, people are now in a situation to kind of step back a little bit and say, right, we did what we had to do for the pandemic, but how do we now set things up and put that into a sustainable model for the future, knowing that we will always now have some element of blended kind of at school and at home learning that's always going to be happening. So yeah, that's kind of how we see the state of play at the moment. But again, you know, if you've got any comments or thoughts around that, feel free to use a Q&A. So I'm going to hand over to Tom, who's going to talk a little bit about how a hybrid filter works, or what a hybrid filter actually is.
So how does hybrid filter work? So with hybrid filter, it works with your current Smoothwall, should you, of course, already have a Smoothwall on-premise filter. And I'd like to welcome both those who do and those who don't into this conversation. I've seen some new names and some old names and some names I don't recognize on the attendee list. So great to see you all. So for those of you I've got an existing on-premise Smoothwall filter or firewall. That is filtering the traffic, as you can see, from these on-site users down the bottom right corner here, who have got, I tell you what, I bet I've got a pointer. Have I got that pointy thing? Can I do the pointy thing? No, I can't do the pointy thing. Never mind. You'll just have to take my directions. Those on-site users down there on the bottom right-hand side, hey, thanks, Rob. Without Cloudfilter, they're going through the regular on-premise filter. They're getting filtered at the edge of the network. They're probably authenticating with Active Directory or their legacy BYO devices, and they're doing the traditional straight through edge of network. Is this a bad site? Yes, let's block it. Let's record it. Let's raise an alert. That's the traditional stuff that we all know and love. That filter then sends its configuration into the Smoothwall Cloud Service. That synchronizes with the Smoothwall Cloud Service, so they share a configuration. So anything that you do in the Smoothwall Cloud Service where you set a new policy, that will synchronize back down to the on-premise device. Anything you do on the on-premise device to set a new policy, that synchronizes up to Smoothwall's Cloud Filter. So it's effectively two filters working as one. That cloud service then talks to different devices. So that could be a Chromebook, a Windows device, a Mac, or an iPad. And each of those devices has on it the full capacity to do all of the filtering with the Smoothwall content filter. So that includes it's able to determine whether a URL is pornography, news, sports, whatever category that might be. So we look at a big list of URLs and we say, well, yeah, we know that bbc.co.uk/sport is sport. It's kind of pretty static. We always know that. So that the device is able to do that by itself without reference back to the cloud service. The device is then also able to look at search terms. So if we type in online poker into Google, it's able to extract that search term, determine that that search term is around a gambling theme. And third, and most importantly, it's also able to do that content filtering. So as we download a page, look at the content of that page, look at the construction, look at the context, and discover what category that page is. So the device itself is capable of that. So it doesn't matter whether it's in school or outside of school. Any browsing on that device is seen, is understood, and is categorized. So we've got these on the left that Mr. Fox has kindly boxed out for me, which are outside of school, and we can also have devices in school also using this same paradigm. Yeah. So the end device is able to understand that categorization. It's then able to make a decision based on your policy. So that's come down from the cloud service there. Without touching your on-premise device, make a decision on whether that site should be allowed or blocked, display a block page, and importantly, both alert on that and write logs. Yeah? And those logs we write go up into the cloud service and back down onto your on-premise device. Optionally, we also have a service that can do all the reporting in the cloud, when instead of all the logs heading onto your on-premise device, we flip that arrow around and we can shoot those logs up into the cloud for analysis there. That's what we call cloud reporting. So that, in a nutshell, is how hybrid filtering works. Of course, it is possible to balance these two sets of users down on the bottom right here, the on-site users with Cloudfilter and the on-site users without Cloudfilter. In some organizations, you might find 95% using Cloudfilter, so going straight past the on-premise filtering, and we're not bothering with them there because we've got the filtering on the device. In others, you might find there's a much higher proportion of on-site users just using the regular on-premise filter. So that's something that's entirely in your control. Yeah, at Smoothwall, we don't say you've got a license to do 50-50 or 100 of these and 1,000 of these. that's in your control. How much traffic do you want to put through the local box versus how much traffic do you want to deal with by using the agent and cloud-based filtering? And of course, that could come to the position where ultimately 100% of traffic is using the agent. And at that point, you might only need your on-premise box for firewall, or you might not need it at all.
Thanks, Tom. Can you quickly talk a little bit about this mechanism here where, we've got some devices that are using the filter on premise, but we've got other devices that are not filtered. How does that work so that we know that?
So each device that is filtered sends out effectively, we call it a secret knock. It sends out a piece of traffic to the on-premise device to say, dear on-premise device, I'm already filtering this user's traffic. Please let me straight through and out to the internet. And the reason we do that is twofold. Number one, double bagging filtering is no fun at all. Because if you have two devices filtering something, then you'll end up with two log lines. It can be a bit clunky, so we'd rather not double bag that filtering. And number two, allowing that traffic to go straight out through your on-premise device reduces the load on your on-premise device, and that in turn extends its lifetime. As Folky said, we're already thinking about how do we save our schools money. We know budgets are not unlimited, so if you can wring the neck of a 5 or 6 year old device and have it last a lot longer because you're pushing. Ultimately, you've got more internet bandwidth, you've got more users, you've got more filter traffic, but the hard work is done off the device. That can give your device a bit more longevity.
Cool. And then you mentioned around the cloud service and the on-premise that they talk to each other and they share their configuration and their log data. So when it comes to making changes, say I want to block a website, whatever that is, how do we do that? What's your recommendation there? So
my recommendation is that anybody who's using the cloud filter go and use the new user interface in the cloud. It's a little easier to use than the interface on-prem, but importantly, because it's in the cloud, you can use it from anywhere. So if you as an administrator of this service happen not to be in the school, you can get easy access to the filtering interface and change policy really quickly wherever you happen to be. In addition, you can create logins to that service, and those logins can single sign-on with G Suite, with Office 365. You can have two-factor authentication, so you've got a much easier to access secure service there for managing your filter policies, and hopefully be able to allow folks to delegate that out with it being completely audited.
Cool. And yeah, there's a two-way synchronization between those two, isn't there? So it doesn't matter if you accidentally change something on the on-premise, it's still going to take effect. It's not that it gets overwritten or overruled by the cloud service, which is really nice. Great. So yeah, I think this kind of hybrid approach where it doesn't matter where the device is, they're getting the same level of filtering, same quality of filtering, and the same policies is a real boost. That we don't have to worry about, is this kid at school today or not, because that cloud filter's on there. If they're at home, it's going to filter it. If they're at school, it's going to filter it as well, and it's going to bypass the on-premise filter so that you're not double filtering. It's a really, I would say this, but it's a really, really smart way of doing it, and I think it just reduces so many headaches that people have had previously, where perhaps they've had, these Chromebooks from DFE that have got some filtering on there, but then when they're at school, you kind of get a combination of the filtering that's on there plus the on-premise filtering, and it just gets really confusing. You want to unblock something, where do you unblock it? Do you do it in both places? This is just a really neat and simple way of dealing with filter in this modern kind of hybrid age of on-premise and remote working. So cool.
Right. Let's see if we can get into some of the questions. We will start with Ian Stark. Ian has asked, we are looking to move over to cloud filtering for our school one-to-one iPads. Currently, we're using the global proxy setup on the iPads to our on-prem Smoothwall appliance. So for those who aren't familiar with global proxy, that means Ian's iPads are using a proxy that's effectively publicly available on the internet, and traffic is transiting back. Look at that, folks. What a wonderful bit of arrow work you're doing there. So the traffic is transiting back through the on-premise filter and then therefore out to the internet. That certainly works. It has advantages and disadvantages. The major disadvantages being that you're relying on your school internet connection for that traffic, and that the traffic of iPads when they're outside of the building is still transiting through that same connection in both directions. So particularly if you have an asymmetric connection, you could find yourself overloading your connection a little bit there. The other disadvantage is you have to leave a proxy port open to the wider internet. These iPads could be from any IP address anywhere in the world. That can be a bit challenging because you need to put a little bit of security around that. Not always the most straightforward thing. So global proxy, whilst it's a thing you can do, it's something we prefer. We prefer not to.
I think just something the diagram doesn't really make clear, but just to really point out, when these devices are at home and they're accessing the internet, they're not sending their traffic, through the Smoothwall and out to the internet. They're not even sending their traffic through our cloud service and out to the internet. They're going directly to the internet themselves. So, even if, worst case scenario, and obviously this hasn't happened, but if that cloud service wasn't available, it's not going to stop them getting on the internet, because this is all about kind of coordination, making sure the policies are synchronized and collecting the logs. But when they access the internet, they're going directly to it. So if they're watching Netflix, they're going to be benefiting from Netflix's edge caching and, getting, it from their local content delivery network. They're not going to be sending all those bytes through us or through the on-premise. So that's the difference with global proxy, because global proxy does follow this path where it goes to your on-premise box and then out to the internet. So that's why we've really seen that become much less favorable an option compared to the cloud service.
One thing to note with some other services that do transit your data through their own cloud service, I shall mention no names, but often these folks host their services in AWS. AWS, of course, noticeable by not really having much of a presence in UK. So you'll often find your traffic bouncing out of Dublin, which is fine, but until you get, folks wanting to do geo-IP stuff, so Google suddenly thinks you're coming from Ireland and you end up bouncing to google.co.ie, which, is fine, and it's more fun on St. Patrick's Day, but it could get a little confusing from time to time. Anyway, I recognize that we've gone off on a massive tangent. We've seen Folks' good arrow game, and we've seen his dreadful wonky blue line game. But in all that, we haven't answered Ian's question. So ultimately, Ian's question was, we're using the global proxy setup on the iPads to point to our on-prem Smoothwall device. Now we have Cloud Filter set up for our Chromebooks with Secret Knock. Will the iPads and the Smoothwall browser app use the Secret Knock? So, bit to unpack here again. On an iPad, we can't really get access. Nobody can gain access to your browsing data. Now, there's a handful of ways you can deal with an iPad, and they all come down to some form of a global proxy. Yeah, whether that's at the other end of a VPN, whether it's a proxy, whether it's this, that, or whatever. That kind of operation, yeah, which involves a man-in-the-middle certificate, and it involves making sure all the apps can still function through this proxy, which can be challenging, particularly with MITM. Or it involves a DNS type filter. In our case, we've gone for a Smoothwall browser app, so it's a replacement browser. Normally, replacement browsers are not very well liked because generally the quality of the browser is dreadful. Yeah? And those who have spoken to me about replacement browsers in the past will know that when I'm not on a recorded webinar, my thoughts about replacement browsers are usually a little bit more severe. So when we looked at this, we thought, there's got to be a way to get into this traffic in iPad. We talked to Apple, we talked to all the MDM vendors. No one could give us a way to get to the traffic we wanted to see to give that filtering quality. We realized we had to go and build a replacement browser. We decided not to build a replacement browser and rather to take an existing browser. So the Smoothwall browser is actually a reskinned Firefox, which in turn uses WebKit, same as Safari, because if you're a browser in Apple's web store, for now you must use WebKit. It is the rules. They won't allow anybody else in. Currently having a big old fight in the courts about that, but we'll leave them to it. So we've got a replacement browser. It's a very good browser because it's based on Firefox, so it's fully featured, it's fully compatible. You install that browser on the iPad. As of iOS 14, you can now tell the iPad that Safari is no longer the default browser, and so all links and things open in your new browser. So all that's tickety-boo. We've got that working. We've got the browser in there. The browser's got the full content filtering in there. Ian is asking, I told you I'd get to your question eventually, will the iPads with the Smoothwall browser app use the secret knock? And the answer is no, they won't. The reason being that you're not allowed to run something in the background on an iPad. So of course, the secret knock to keep working, we've got to keep kind of knocking. We've got to keep telling the filter, hey, this is still me. I'm still filtered. We can't kind of tell it one off and hope for the best. Hey, this IP doesn't need filtering, carry on. Like, that's sort of dangerous. So we've got to tell it, we tell it every 15 minutes. This is still me. This is still me. Please, we're still filtered. Please let me through. We can't do that on an iPad because we haven't got a background process to keep that heartbeat going. So what we advise with iPads is segregate them onto a network and stick them on unfiltered, but make sure those iPads are well managed. Make sure that the Smoothwall browser is the only browser available and that no other apps are on there that can allow kind of free access to the internet.
So a couple of ways to segregate those. You could either give those iPads static reservations in DHCP, so you know which IP address they're always going to get, and then you can put them as unfiltered on the Smoothwall. Or you could create an entirely separate network, so maybe a separate SSID just for the iPads with its own network range. There's a few different ways of doing that, but if you wanted to talk through those options, feel free to get in touch, and we'll put you through to someone from the architecture team who can chat through those options with you.
And I'm going to jump then to Chris Miller's question. Sorry, I will get back to the ones answered first, but I like to ping around on a few tangents here and there. Chris Miller's question is there a Cloud Filter client app for Firefox in Windows if you're using it on iPads? Only currently aware of Chrome and Edge ones. At present, there is no app for Firefox in Windows because Firefox on iPad is totally different, and we've actually baked it into the source code there rather than it being an extension. So they're really totally different based on Windows. We are currently working to rebuild our app to conform to Google's brand new, what they call Manifest v3, which is their new rules about how extensions are supposed to work. These new rules are largely there to make ad blockers stop working, it seems. So they're pretty annoying for us too. We suspect that as we do that, the extension will probably become more and more portable to Firefox, but we'll keep you updated on that. But yeah, no Firefox on Windows for the moment. So Mr. Fawkes, would you like to pick yourself a question?
Yeah, so I'll take, there's an anonymous question that's, we don't have a cloud service set up. What happens to the filtering while offline? So if a pupil or staff take their device home, does this get logged and then viewable when the laptop returns to site? So I'm not sure what filtering product you're using at the moment and how that's set up, but typically if you haven't got any kind of remote filtering set up on that device, it's likely that when that's at home, it's not filtered at all and logged. So if you were to use the Smoothwall Cloud Filter, when that device was at home, it would continue to be filtered and logged, and actually those logs would come into your reporting, even if it never came back to school, because they're constantly sending those logs over the internet. So yeah, I'm not sure entirely on the context of the question, and feel free to stick through the clarification. But yeah, it sounds like if you haven't got any cloud service set up at the moment, then maybe that's that's just not filtering them at home. I'm not too sure.
As Rob says, the important thing to note is that logging always happens when we're off site, and it does not need a Smoothwall Cloud Filter to come back to base. You see that the arrows here, it's a two-way thing with the cloud service. We're firing those logs back up there, and they are either being analyzed in the cloud, in which case you'll see them pretty much straight away when you run a report, or there's an hourly sync back down to the on-prem device. In addition, if one of those young people who's taking their iPads out of school were to visit, a site about self-harm, for example, that alert would be raised up through the Smoothwall Cloud service as well, so that alert would happen instantaneously.
Great. I'll take the next one. Service on remote devices using a client or DNS. So as Tom just alluded to, the client is an extension in the browser. So it doesn't rely on DNS to do the filtering. We've talked before in other webinars about this concept of kind of like a pyramid of filtering, where you've got different levels of filtering, that as you rise that pyramid, you get to the top, which is the Smoothwall content filtering. DNS is a very, very simplistic approach to filtering, because all DNS sees is the domain name that you're accessing. So it would know if you're on Facebook or you're on BBC, but it wouldn't know anything about what you're doing within there. So you take something like Twitter, which has got obviously great content in terms of news, social activity, things like that. But it's also got a lot of pornography, it's got a lot of violence, it's got a lot of extremism, terrorism content. So if you've got a DNS filter, all it will know is you are on twitter.com. It won't even know you're on twitter.com/Rob's Twitter. So a DNS filter is really not powerful enough to provide the level of filtering we need to safeguard our users. So that's why for Cloud Filter, we went down this route of using an extension, because it allows us to see absolutely everything that student is seeing on their device, therefore allowing us to do the content filtering, where we're looking at not only the address of the page, but that actual content, so the words, the phrases, the code, everything that's contained within that page. Ultimately, then that means that, yeah, as I say, for Twitter, we can see exactly what you're looking at on Twitter or whatever that site is, and then appropriately filter that.
It was interesting that Rob and I were looking at some of our Monitor customers. So for those of you who don't know, Monitor is a second Smoothwall product, which again is agent-based, looks at everything the young people are typing and creating, and takes a snapshot of the screen and what they were doing if something concerning is happening. And we've been releasing this product into the US market of late, and we ended up with a customer who had a DNS filter and was using Monitor at the same time, and the moderation team, so all the feedback that comes through Monitor's sort of AI and rules engine then gets looked at by a human moderation team who make the call as to whether to raise this as an alert, not raise it at all, or in really serious places make a phone call. And we found just on Instagram that free sex, 18 plus, boob pics, dry humping therapist. What? Anyway, the things we saw in one day on Instagram, yeah, because there was, these guys were using a DNS filter. They could say Instagram yes or Instagram no. They couldn't. There was no in between for them. There was no Instagram, but not the bad stuff. And the stuff we saw put a stark divide in, what we consider to be acceptable filtering for young people in schools and what we frankly don't. And we don't really consider DNS to be a useful tool for filtering of children's devices. DNS filtering might be a useful tool for a guest network, for example, where you've no chance of putting even a certificate, never mind an agent, on someone's device. They're in there in the school environment briefly. They're adults. They're coming in there to parents' evening or whatever. Those sort of things. DNS filtering might be a good answer there because it's super lightweight and it will just prevent the absolute worst. And on a network like that, you can lock it down pretty hard. So, but
that kind of leads into Andy's question about, if you can filter the on-site users using Cloudfilter, why do you need an on-site filter?
Yeah, and welcome, Andy. Nice to see a Yorkshireman knocking into the questions there. Nice to see you again. Yeah, absolutely, Andy. Why would you need the on-premise filter? So there's a handful of reasons why you might need the on-premise filter. I'd love to hear some of your reasons why you'd still want an on-premise filter in place as well. It's great to pick up those bring your own device, those guest networks, and also, of course, many of you using the Smoothwall on-premise to act as a firewall as well. Much more difficult to stick your firewall in the cloud. So it's always going to be a possibility with Smoothwall to keep some or all of your traffic from the school going through that on-premise device.
Yeah, it's that kind of sweeping up approach. You put Cloudfilter on everything you can, then that, if the school has to close or whatever, then that device can go home and it's going to be protected. Anything else that's left, like printers, BYOD, old servers, things like that, then, you sweep those up with an on-premise filter. It could be that, a DNS filter might be right for that. But again, knowing some of the limitations of that, maybe that's where you still want the on-premise filter to be able to do that level of filtering for those devices. And as Tom says, you're ultimately going to need a firewall somewhere. So obviously, you can just combine those two quite easily.
I'll pick up Callum's question next, if I may. So Callum, thank you for your question. He asks, if you have an on-premise filter and have the Cloudfilter installed on a laptop, will you still need to install the HTTPS inspection certificate on that device? And the answer is no, you won't. One of the reasons that we went for an extension, which it kind of arguably makes our life more difficult. I mean, we refer back to the previous question of, is the extension available on Firefox? No, it isn't. So that does mean we can't support using the Firefox browser in these environments. But why did we go with the extension? We went with the extension because at the extension level, you're clear of the network stack. And in that network stack, you've got encryption, you've got ESNI, you've got DNS over HTTP, you've got QUIC, you've got HTTP2, HTTP3, IPv6, all sorts of horrible stuff, which in the modern internet is changing faster and faster, that you want to allow your users to use, because HTTP3, even if they only use it when they're hitting Google properties, like stuff comes down that bit quicker. If you're using Google Docs, that edge of that latency that HTTP3 knocks off is noticeable and good. You want them to be able to use these. So we didn't want to be doing something on device at the network level, because on device at the network level would still mean we had to break that encryption. It would still mean that our software had to understand all these protocols and some of the great stuff that these new protocols like HTTP3 do, like pipelining, allowing multiple requests to come down the same kind of channel, as it were, make it incredibly difficult to block things at that level without like blocking stuff you don't want to, or causing unnecessary delay. So we went for this extension idea in order that we didn't want to ever think about HTTPS certificates again, and we wanted access to that data once the network stack had finished with it. So no, you won't need an HTTPS certificate, and that's great because that means much lower latency. And once you've stuck the agent on there, that's a kind of fire and forget. No replacing certificates every 18 months or whatever it is the modern certificate demands.
Great. There's a question about how Smoothwall Cloud is priced, whether it's per device or per user. It's priced per user, so all of our products are price per user nowadays because you know how many students you've got. The number of devices you've got might change. Somebody decides to go and buy a load of Chromebooks, doesn't matter because you're licensed per user.
So count the number of ears and divide by 2.
There's a question from Robert. Can location-based filtering be applied to block different things on site versus at home? Absolutely, yeah. So we have a concept of there's an outside premises location where you can then say, streaming video, games, whatever is allowed offsite, but is not allowed on site. So then basically, even if that device is using Cloudfilter, but is at school, we'll know the difference, and then we'll be able to apply that filtering appropriately. Mark asks, a while back there was some talk about having a hierarchical interface, allowing someone to see a number of schools at a top level and then drilling down to a specific school to manage it. Is there any news regards this? So depending on exactly what it is you're talking about, I think we've already got that kind of thing. So, in the scenario where we've got like a multi-academy trust that's got 50 schools, you can have one single Smoothwall configuration where you've got a policy table for policies that apply to everybody. So that would include things like blocking terrorism, pornography, adult content, things like that. But then beneath there, you can have policies per school. So there you might have the rules that say, at this academy, we want to block YouTube. At this academy, we don't. We want to allow Facebook at this one at these times. And importantly, you can also then delegate that control. So you can say the IT team, the DSL at this school are responsible for just this school's policies, and they only affect that school. So that's what we call the multi-tenant management. And it even works if you've got separate on-premise boxes at each school. You can still collect all of those configurations into one and manage them centrally. And those individual Cloudfilter devices, when you deploy the software to them, there's two configs you put on there. You put in a serial number, so we know which customer you are, but you can also optionally put in a tenant ID, and that relates to which of those schools in that multi-tenant setup that device belongs to. So then, the devices go home, but we still know that this Chromebook is responsible for this school and therefore has their policies, and that one for that school. So yeah, feel free to get in touch, and we can talk about whether or not that's something that you wanted to set up. But yeah, it's really popular across our MATs and local authorities. Even some individual schools use it. If they've got a split site, something like that. Let's have a look down. So Peter was saying he thinks Anon was a current Smoothwall customer. So this was the person talking about logs and reports off site. Thinking about Cloudfilter, but reporting back to on-prem. Presumably this is impossible. You've got the wrong end of the stick. You need to buy upgrade to cloud service.
So that is possible if he's got Smoothwall Cloudfilter or she's got Smoothwall Cloudfilter, and we're using the Cloudfilter browser on iPad. The reporting will ultimately land back on your on-premise device.
Yeah, so that's the same with all the cloud products. All the reporting is still centralized and happens not immediately in real time, but certainly within the hour, if not quicker. That's right, Tom, isn't it?
Yeah, unless of course you've got the cloud reporting option, which is a sort of chargeable add-on because it costs us money to stick all your logs into the cloud, but that will give you more immediate options for Cloudfilter logs. I've got a question here from Darren around the DFE have a new cybersecurity requirement to install police cyber alarm. Indeed, a lot of schools are being asked to install police cyber alarm, which is a small VM which forwards a local Smoothwall syslog to a central government server for analysis. Bit of news one, we are working with Police Cyber Alarm to make a much better integration between Smoothwall and Police Cyber Alarm. The first of that will be released in the Leeds 59 update, which should be out shortly. And indeed, that does forward the traffic to the central government. So what that is forwarding is firewall rules, firewall blocks. Yeah. So Darren, you asked, when we move from a local Smoothwall to all filtering and monitoring in the cloud, will the cloud instance of Smoothwall provide access to that syslog to comply with the DFE's requirement? Actually, what you want there is the local firewall that's the edge of your school's network, because what Cyber Alarm's looking for is it's looking for patterns of traffic that are hitting the school network rather than what the kids are up to. So if we think about the web filtering as like what things the kids are visiting out there in the wide world, the monitoring about things that the kids are creating, and the firewall then as the things that the outside world is pushing in your direction. That's what police cyber alarm are interested in. They're interested in what's coming from the big wild internet and being directed at your school, rather than what are folks in your school requesting, what's coming from the internet and attempting to hit your school. So, for example, during COVID, when everybody was opening remote desktop to as ways to quickly get people working, a lot of ransomware actors were hitting remote desktop ports. If you weren't one of these people who'd opened remote desktop, or you were and you were smart and you'd opened it to just a subset of IPs, or you were and you were smart and you were using VPN, then someone trying to hit the remote desktop port on your firewall would have caused a block. Maybe there's all of you are smart, all however many tens of you that are out there on this webinar today, we're all smart and you'd all done this and you'd all got Cyber Alarm installed. And that feeds back to police cyber alarm. They'd be able to say, well, this IP range is clearly scanning for RDP. Yeah, clearly looking to break in, because we've seen it at the 100 unconnected schools. Then the 101st unconnected school, they're able to say, you should block this IP address range, or these are the actions you should take to avoid. Because now we've identified an attacker by something they've done that's been blocked at a load of unconnected schools, and it's about that threat intelligence that they're trying to build. So I think it's a really good idea. There's been some people complaining about police cyber alarm. Some people suggesting it might not be super secure. Someone on the register had a good go at them about an early version of their product. My experience of working them is they're absolutely in good faith. They're doing a good job, and it's a pretty good idea that should hopefully in future be able to save some of us some pain. So Smoothwall will always help you to comply with that, but that will largely be through an on-premise firewall. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. And again, do feel free to raise your hand if you want to sort of respond in by the medium of voice rather than typing all this stuff. Folks, do you want to pick out a question, mate?
Yeah. So Andy's just followed up and said thanks for explaining about why they might need an on-prem filter firewall. He's saying further this year might want to have a chat, which is obviously. Yeah, more than happy to do that, as they plan to move serverless, with the exception of perhaps a local Wi-Fi controller and maybe a small handful of kind of desktop devices. Yeah, totally understand where you're coming from there. We're in the process of organising an office move, and I think our IT team are looking forward to their shopping list being firewall, access points, switches, and that's it. No pesky servers. So yeah, it's definitely the trajectory we're seeing. I think schools will inevitably still have a few bits of legacy things hanging around, but very much the trajectory is that really the only infrastructure in a school is to get people onto the internet. So cloud is a perfect solution for that, because it just reduces the amount of physical things you need to manage and look after on the school site, and it just simplifies everything. So one for you, Tom. Does the cloud filter work with Android devices yet?
It does not just yet. We're still kind of working out what we can do for Android devices. As I said before, my views on replacement browsers are pretty strong. I'd rather not have to do that. It's my fervent hope that this change in Google's methodologies around extensions will mean that one of their excuses for this, I'm pretty sure it's mainly aimed at blocking ad blockers, but one of their excuses for this is extensions will perform better. And it's my fervent hope that that means they will allow extensions on Android, which would do us a great service. But it's something we're keeping a weather eye on, but I can't make any promises today.
Thank you. So Mark asks, if Cloud doesn't need to HTTPS inspect, I'm guessing that it means it's much better at applying content filtering to sites such as sites.google.com/sites and blocking unblocked games, YouTube, etc. Yeah, I mean, I think it's more about the practicalities of doing it rather than whether or not it's any better at content filtering. You know, the level of content filtering is the same, but because you don't have to do that HTTPS inspection, that man in the middle, it's a lot simpler. And it also means that where perhaps with on-premise you've got some slight conflicting situations where perhaps you need to set a site not to be inspected for some technical reason, like sometimes with like Chromebooks, in order to sign in, you can't do that inspection. But actually then you want to be able to do inspection on certain bits of that domain. That problem goes away because it's not doing inspection, it's just analyzing what's actually on the page. So yeah, in that respect, it's practically simpler, but in terms of actually, is it better at content filtering? Fundamentally, it's the same, it's just easier to apply.
Yeah, but a very insightful question. And I think both Rob and I are extremely glad that we don't have to deal with walking that tightrope of which domains can I MITM and which domains do I not have to MITM, and what does that mean I have to allow, and what does that mean that we don't get visibility on in order to make Google Earth work or whatever accursed thing it is today. And that, you know, as we see a coalescing of, you know, the in-web endpoints to, you know, Google endpoints, AWS endpoints, Azure endpoints, it becomes harder and harder to split out the things that you want to inspect and the things that you can't inspect. So yeah, you're right. Cloudfilter gives you a great advantage there.
Okay, I'm just getting to the last questions now. We're part of the PSBA Smoothwall setup, which is the national setup in Wales. Would it be possible for the school to remove our on-prem Smoothwall and move back to the PSBA Smoothwall cluster and still use Cloudfilter for the iPads? I believe so. I think we've been working with the PSBA team and the Hub team to just validate some of the stuff around iPads and Cloudfilter and Intune and Azure AD and, you know, everything when you take it to the scale of things like PSBA, which is a countrywide system, gets slightly more complicated and a few more kind of hoops to jump through. But my understanding is that, yes, you can do that. So if you wanted to get in touch with either us or your local authority, we should be able to sort it out for you.
And yeah, good comment there from Peter about the cyber alarm security issues. I do think, like, to begin with, they were just batting them away, which is not the way to deal with security issues. But I think they've, as you say, they've started to realise that this is important, and they're doing it properly. Certainly, I was reassured by their renewed commitment to actually listening to people. They've just got that. They've got that perhaps slightly governmental way of just going, yeah, our way is right and everyone else is wrong, and dismiss the security concerns, which not cool, guys, not cool. But yeah, I'm reassured that they've got their ears open and their eyes open now.
It's something we get asked a lot, particularly with the monitor products, about, you know, do we send stuff to the government? And I think that there's, like Tom talked about before, there's a huge difference between sending kind of firewall logs and attack level stuff that's hitting your public IP address versus us sending, like, which student went to what website and did what, you know. there's no reason for the government to have that, sort of the police to have that information like on demand. You know, certainly if they were to come with the appropriate paperwork and through the school, we could provide that. But yeah, I think when it comes to firewall attacks, that's a lot more kind of just raw anonymized data. So it certainly makes sense for them to get that full picture of, you know, what's going on at an attack level.
Yeah, and I think you could quite happily treat myself and Mr. Faulkner as canaries in the coal mine. If you see us departing Smoothwall at a rate of knots, you'll know that we've given our data to the government, because, you know, we're not those people, are we? We just, yeah.
No, and as a company,
it wouldn't be us, and as a company, we wouldn't be part of something like that. So, you know, we try to be, you know, our ethics and integrity are incredibly important to us around the whole business, and that's something that's reflected in our new friends in Australia as well.
Yeah. So we had a couple of questions that just came in before the webinar. I think we've talked about some of these, like, you know, how can you use BYOD on an on-prem box and how that works. I think we've covered that quite a lot. Is the cloud hosted solution managed by Smoothwall distributors? So it's managed by us. We host in Microsoft Azure in the UK. But as I mentioned before, you know, we're not sending all of your traffic through there. So actually, you know, it doesn't have as much of an impact as it would with a sort of like, what we used to kind of call private cloud, where, you know, you didn't have filtering in your school, but effectively it was just a big fat Smoothwall somewhere else. This is very, very different. You know, this is a ground up designed cloud system that just uses the cloud for coordination and communication. How to overcome limitations of reporting in cloud filtering and live monitoring capabilities. Do you want to talk about, Tom, you know, how reporting works with cloud and real time and things like that?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple of ways that reporting works, and we see reporting now as a little different to real time. We kind of conflated the two for the longest time, and I think it confused our customers and our engineers to a degree. So with Cloudfilter, there's a couple of ways. So the agent sends back report data every 5 minutes, and that report data is the stuff that, you know, everyone's used to. Like, Rob Faulkner went to playboy.com at 13:46. It was blocked because it was porn. Yeah, he is in group students. That sort of data flows back every 5 minutes to the Smoothwall Cloud Reporting Service. That is it. If you haven't got cloud reporting enabled, that's downloaded onto the on-premise box, where you can report on it at your leisure in the same way as you always would. The two things that you might want to do real-time: alerting, as we've said. The agent is responsible for working out when an alert should be raised. That raises it directly through the Cloudfilter API, and that sends you an email. But there's the third thing, which is real-time view of what a student is doing. If you want that real-time view, you can bob into the Cloudfilter portal, put in the student's name. We'll search and find which device that student's using, give you a choice of any devices they're logged into at the minute. You pick the device, and we'll make a real-time connection to it, much in the same way as Zoom is making a real-time connection to your machine right now. We'll make that RTP connection, and we'll stream back in real time that log data. So you've always got that opportunity to go real time, and you can use that regardless of where in the world the end device is.
Mostly people are doing that for troubleshooting, aren't they?
Yes. So the reporting tends to be more about the DSL usage, the pastoral usage, the understanding of what has happened, whereas the real-time stuff tends to be, hey, I can't get on site X, it's being blocked because. And you know, the end user doesn't always have the information you need to hand. So zoom in there, and you can pull the real-time logs, and you can also pull a real-time copy of the diagnostic page to see what groups that the Smoothwall filter thinks they're in, and what username they're definitely logged in as, and what the date on the latest version of the block list is, and all that sort of good troubleshooting tackle. It's the sort of thing our support team would ask you if you came to them and saying, I'm getting an overblock.
And then the last one on there, I think we've talked about that. How to filter laptops in student homes, Cloudfilter.
Yes, this is the answer.
No, I think that's it for everybody. So thank you everybody for attending, and thank you for submitting your questions. If you do have any further questions that you think of, please feel free to fire them through to me at inquiries@smoothwall. And then, yeah, thank you very much for attending.